listening to Rev and the Rest with your host, The Rev. In this episode, I'm doing an interview with the Bloodstained Men and Their Friends. The Bloodstained Men and Their Friends are an intactivist organization. I was lucky enough to get an interview with one of their members and to be able to learn a lot more. I hope you guys enjoy this episode and find some of our information be enlightening.
Hey, Harry, how are you? Tell me more about the group you're with.
Hi there. My name's Harry Guiremand, and I'm with the Bloodstained Men and Their Friends. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching people about the harms of infant circumcision.
Okay, interesting. And I understand you guys travel all around the United States and try to talk to people, and you also have certain uniforms.
Yeah, we've been to almost, I think, every state except Alaska and Hawaii now. And we have been to hundreds of cities. And we do tours in a region. Our next tour will be in just focused on Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So we'll go all around the state of Pennsylvania. And we wear a white outfit with a red blood stain on the crotch to illustrate the wound and the harm of genital cutting.
Yeah. And, I saw, Bloodstained Men myself in person. I definitely saw your guys' outfits really, really caught the eye of a lot of people. And, I like the fact that Bloodstained Men uses shock value. And then, while they're using shock, they also have, normative signs that also show some of the harm done by infant circumcision. So
yeah, you got to get people's attention. And so you got to have that initial shock to get their attention. And then you can start the educating process. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I myself am in favor of male genitals. And the thing is with circumcision, I was shocked to find out that there were actual groups about this back in 2016 when I first found Bloodstained Men. I definitely was very shocked to see that, this isn't just like people think this. There's actual like activism being done about it, and people are spreading this information as opposed to some guy just having to kind of look behind the scenes a little.
Right. I mean, people have been writing scholarly texts about this for years, and people have been protesting since the 70s. Mm-hmm. The first protest we know that happened in America was in, I think, 1972 in Tallahassee, Florida. Mm-hmm. Those guys got arrested and went to jail because Tallahassee was not ready for such a protest. Mm-hmm. But and we have gotten arrested too at times, but we do everything we can to make sure we can do our protest without any incident. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you have somebody who wants to exert authority, which they don't really have, because it's a free speech right to be on the street and make your point. We're Americans.
On a public sidewalk, that's one thing, like groups that, spread heinous messages, there are various racist organizations or, even the Westboro Baptist Church. They often will use public sidewalks because of the fact that public sidewalks are quote unquote a free speech zone,
Right. So, yeah, we've been compared to them, but we really are nothing like those people. I mean, our message is protecting people from harm, and we don't go out of our way to antagonize people like they do.
Yeah,
it's a secular message. It's not really based on religious belief. It's based on human rights.
Yeah, I have friends that are pagan. They're in favor of intact genitalia. I have friends that are atheists. They're in favor of that. I myself am a Christian, and I'm in favor of that. I definitely see that there is a lot of harm that can be done to it, and there's so many myths and stuff like that. And I debunked a lot of them in this paper I wrote my senior year after I found the Bloodstained Men. I wrote a paper on circumcision.
Oh, wonderful!
I ironically titled it "You Want a Piece of Me."
Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. I hadn't heard that before. That's excellent.
Yeah. I make jokes about it all the time because of the fact that I've also found that humor kind of deactivates some of the hatred and contention. It kind of surrounds, theater.
Right. The trouble with humor has been in the past. Humorists have generally tried to trivialize circumcision, mm-hmm. and you really shouldn't trivialize child abuse.
Yeah.
And because you're enabling it. If you trivialize harm, it's just like if you joked about rape, it would be like saying, well, rapists are okay. And you don't want to in any way enable them. So for me, it's like really hard to use humor because it's like, well, you don't want to be trivializing it. And so it's a yeah, but I mean, if you can do it in a productive way, good for you. Because it's hard. It's really
Yeah,
hard to do
it is
that.
very hard. Like one argument I get, is that the foreskin is less likely to get infected. When you're talking, I mean, like when you cut it off, the foreskin is less likely to get infected. And I'm like, well, if I, like one joke I make back, I'm like, well, if I chop off my arm, I'm less likely to break the bones in it. It's like, sure, it's less likely
Right.
to get infected, but that's because it's no longer there.
Yeah. The logic is just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the myths, I mean, I know this is false myself because I've done research on the topic, but one of the myths that's often popular is, circumcision makes, like is actually helpful to you.
Yeah. It's harmful. I mean, every body part is there with a function. It's evolution produced all of our body parts because they support our life.
Hmm.
And it's there for a reason,
Hmm.
and it provides sexual pleasure. It provides natural lubrication,
Hmm.
and it makes sex more pleasant. I mean, I don't know who wants sex to be less pleasant, and it also
Hmm.
makes sex more pleasant for your partner
Hmm.
because of the gliding action of the foreskin makes the whole process more pleasant. And so it's like, why would you cut off the body part that makes you feel good and makes your partner feel good? I mean, that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
It's 12. I If I remember correctly, the number is like 12,000 nerves are in the foreskin, and
Right.
it's
Yeah.
basically the same as like breaking a fingernail off as opposed to just like maybe like a paper cut. And people are like, well, infants can't remember that, and I'm like, that doesn't mean that it's not painful or could even be traumatizing. And in some cases, I mean, you do see infants dying, because of botched circumcision procedures.
Right. So any surgery has the risk of infection and or bleeding
Hmm.
and death. I mean that, and we don't have good statistics on it because the circumcision industry prevents these statistics from being collected. We
Yeah.
don't really know
Yeah.
how bad it is, but various people have tried to estimate it, and they come up with a number between 100 and 200 American babies die every year from circumcision.
Hmm.
We should have that exact number, and if the medical profession weren't corrupt, we
Hmm.
would. But
Yeah.
they're supporting this corrupt practice by not divulging the harm they do.
Now I understand that there's a lot of money to be made in that too. Is that right?
Yeah, it's $1 billion industry
Yeah.
because they're paid to do the cutting. They sell the foreskin, and the foreskin is very valuable to tissue engineering companies, and
Hmm.
other organizations use them, and it's very valuable.
Hmm. What do they use
So,
it
what
for?
they don't tell, well, they make artificial skin products,
Hmm.
and they make a lot of these little discs of skin of cultured skin,
Hmm.
and those discs sell for about $300 each, and they make hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of material of these skin uh,
Hmm.
cultured skin products from one foreskin. So
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of dollars. The parents aren't being told that this is something very valuable that they want from your son, and that they're going to sell it to somebody else as soon as they cut it off your boy. They don't know that. I mean, they
Hmm.
sign the consent form and they say tissue can be reused or whatever, but they don't
Hmm.
understand what's going on.
Yeah, most
A
people
part of their
probably
baby is
assume.
being stolen.
Yeah, most people probably assume it's for like research purposes or something. They're not really like digging behind the scenes. I know that myself in my situation, my parents were very, oh, it's healthy for them, and also given my parents, my dad's side is very ethnically Jewish, my that's part of why, a lot of it is due to tradition. My great grandfather, when he found out, because he was, very Jewish towards the end of his life, he was like quite pleased with the fact that I was circumcised, but people don't really understand the
Were you
harm.
ritually circumcised?
No, no,
Were you
it was,
circumcised in a ritual? No, in a hospital.
yeah, yeah, in the
And
hospital.
was your father beyond being, was he religiously Jewish or just cultural or just
My
ethnically?
my parents are more just like they're more so generic believers. They don't really practice much, but they're like, oh yeah, we believe it at the end of the day. But
So you were basically raised in the Jewish religion and became a Christian later?
I have like my parents weren't really like raising me in the Jewish religion, but it's like the generic belief that you should, and that's our ethnic background and stuff like that. My
Yeah.
mom's side's the Christian side, actually. My mom's side's Christian. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's good you got exposed to
Mhm.
both ideas.
Yeah. And most people they think, like people that are intactivists are often anti-Semitic when in fact we're not, if I mean it's more so just about
Right.
the procedure. So in regards to circumcision in the United States, you know how it got started, right?
Right. So in terms of, I mean, religious circumcision had been going on from the beginning, but in the 19th century, it was introduced as under a medical context.
Mm-hmm.
And because at that time they didn't have the germ theory of disease, they didn't know what caused diseases, and they thought it was nervous excitation. And so they wrongfully, and this was at the same time of a Victorian masturbation hysteria, and so they believed that the excitation of masturbation caused disease, and so uh, uh, John Harvey Kellogg introduced circumcision as a way to punish a boy from
Mm-hmm.
masturbating, because by causing as much pain as possible and making it harder for him to masturbate.
Mm-hmm.
And he also had a cure for girls who masturbated by pouring acid on their clitoris.
Mm-hmm.
So this was quack, quack, quack medicine, pure
Mm-hmm.
quackery from the 19th century. But
Yeah.
once it started to become a profitable procedure, they
Mm-hmm.
kept coming up with new excuses to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
And those continue to this day. But it's
Yeah.
absolute quackery, always has been.
Yeah, exactly. With I mean, I know also Kellogg was very into manipulating diets. He thought, a bland diet would kind of slow down one's libido. And, in fact, that's not really the case. He just had all sorts of weird ideas on sexuality as opposed to actually getting stuff accomplished. He more so was it was more so, like a way of limiting sexuality without, shame. It was more so just to do it, physically as opposed to taking a toll and having social repercussions or mental repercussions.
Right. And graham crackers, graham flour was supposed to
Yeah,
reduce sexual desire. So that's how we got graham crackers. It's
exactly.
just it's hilarious. There's all this craziness is still with us in one form or another. It
Yeah,
just they were
cornflakes
just
and
in the
s'mores.
dark. They did.
Cornflakes and
Yeah.
s'mores ruined for us forever. Yeah, I'm shocked
Yeah.
that that Kellogg. Like most people just see the last name on a cereal box and that's it. They don't actually know like who Kellogg really was. They're just like, oh, like cornflakes, frosted flakes, various other cereals, and they're just like, okay, but they don't really look at like why Kellogg developed some of them the way he did. It's not that cornflakes were just like, oh, this is good and I can make money off of the food industry. It's more like, hey, it was served to patients to limit things.
Right. But once they had a product they could sell and it was successful, well, that was great. They had a roaring business going, which it's a huge industry still today. So
This is WGRN 94.1 Community Radio, the Green Renaissance. You're listening to Rev and the Rest, and I'm your host, the Rev. We're talking about the Bloodstained Men and their friends today with my guest, Harry. Harry is a member of the Bloodstained Men, and they're an intactivist organization.
Yeah, I remember reading about Brother K. The one of the higher ups in Bloodstained Men. He actually was he was basically a pioneer in intactivism.
right back in the 70s, he and his wife then, or his partner then, they protested circumcision in California in the mid 70s, I think, and were, I think, the first on the West Coast to do a street protest against circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
And they got in the newspaper. They got AP Wire picked it up, and the story went out. But in spite of getting news, and we get lots of news coverage when we go out, it's still a uphill battle helping people to understand that this is a problem that needs urgent attention.
Exactly. Most people don't quite conceptualize. I was shocked to find out other people in my area, some friends of mine were like, yeah, I'm against it too. And I was like, wow, like you typically don't see that a lot. You see a lot of American moms just kind of go along with it. And then I found, one of my friends who's a mom, she's like, no, I'm against it. And I was like, wow, she's like, good for you for, being on the right side.
Yeah, it's always good to find a young mom who just is they're so fiery, and when they are against it, they're really against it. So they understand they're protecting their boy,
Mm-hmm.
their child, and that's a mother's first duty is to protect her child. So
Yeah.
they get it.
Yeah, exactly. And most people, in the US, I've heard people say, like negative things that kind of are prejudice against men with foreskins, and they're like, oh, that's just, that doesn't look right. And it's like, well, that's actually how it's supposed to look. It's just the American norm is to have a man that's circumcised down there. And that's why, like whenever you see something foreign, it's kind of just, you kind of like scratch your head, but then sometimes, because of the fact that things are foreign to you, you want to reject them. But that's not really the case. That's not why we should do that.
Yeah. Americans often think we do everything right, better than everyone else,
Or American
American
exceptionalism.
exceptionalism.
It tends to be
Exactly.
very toxic, like they're always like, oh, this won't work. And then I'm like, well, in other countries, it's working fine. Well, we don't need to look at other countries. This is America, and it's like, you're like, since the start, the founding fathers, that's what their whole shtick was looking at other countries, seeing what they were doing right, and then doing that. Our American exceptionalism often just leaves us so far behind. We were one of the last Western nations to get rid of slavery. It was
Right.
just crazy.
Right.
It's like, yeah, it's wrong. They're doing something else because they're different than us.
Yeah, I think steal good ideas wherever you can find them.
Mhm.
If somebody over there is doing it better than I'm doing it, I want to copy them. I mean, it's
Mhm.
like, why, stay in a rut when you can make progress?
Yeah, exactly.
And
You
yeah,
know, you look across the world, and it's like, most, European nations, they're not circumcised. Circumcision, I mean, it's just so rare to see in Europe. It's not very popular in Europe, whereas in America, it's like we tend to capitalize on it as opposed to just kind of recognizing, that everyone should be the same way. And I understand that female circumcision is also illegal in the United States.
right. So this is a long story. In 1996, there was the FGM bill. So the bill to make female genital mutilation illegal in the United States.
Hmm.
Prior to that, there was no federal law against it. And going back to 1977, Blue Cross insurance actually covered female circumcision. So it was actually performed and covered by insurance in America until the 70s.
Hmm.
So this law was debated, and at the time, the intactivists were saying, "Well, wait a minute, we boys have to be protected too. We need equal rights under the law here."
Hmm.
But the law was passed without equal protection under the law. So it's unconstitutional in that way because the Constitution says we have a right to equal protection under the law. And so if you protect girls, you got to protect boys.
Hmm.
So far, that hasn't been challenged. The law was challenged a few years ago, and then there was a very strange ruling that found that it violated interstate commerce, which was really odd.
Hmm.
When the real glaring defect is that it doesn't provide equal protection under the law.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was found unconstitutional under that rubric, and then the Congress immediately fixed the law so that it would be in effect again. So it's in effect again.
Hmm.
And the FGM law is perfect in every way. I mean, it's really just brilliant, except that it's not gender neutral. It doesn't
Hmm.
cover both sexes. That's all we ask.
Yeah.
Include us and we're happy.
Yeah. Now I hold the stance myself, it's like, I don't think it should be done on boys, but like once you consent, you're 18. It's like, I personally think, if you want to cut, your foreskin off and you're 18 and you can consent to it, it's like, that's your business. I don't see why you would, but it's like, you want to do it. That's your issue. Whereas,
Right.
as an infant, I can't really consent to such a procedure. That's not really helpful to me. It's not just, like, if like an infant has some sort of heart surgery, it's like that's one thing because of the fact that it's productive, it's life-saving, stuff like that, whereas cutting off the foreskin doesn't really do anything. In fact, it's counterproductive. It makes it more likely for you to get infected down there as opposed to actually saving your life. So what are your stances regarding the legality of infant circumcision and what we should do about it?
Well, Peter Adler, who's a professor of law in Massachusetts, wrote a very interesting paper called "Is Circumcision Legal?" And he concludes that it's not legal today under existing laws. So this is a top-notch legal scholar who says, no, it's not legal already. It's already illegal. So it's not like we're trying to change the law. We're just trying to people to understand what the law is already. And so it's already illegal and should not be done. It's a criminal assault and should be prosecuted.
How would you say it's interpreted in the law? You know, like, I mean, maybe my knowledge is very limited on various laws, but you know, it's like I don't think that, you know, the infant male circumcision is explicitly in the law books, is it?
So you have a right to privacy, which is recognized by the law. You have the right, which means that your private parts belong to you. You have a right to security of person or right to bodily integrity. This is the most fundamental human right, and the law is built on these rights. Consent, when a parent consents to surgery on a dependent child, that surgery has to be done because it's necessary for the life of the child. There has to be an urgent need to intervene in order to consent to an amputation on a child. And there's no urgent need. The child is perfectly healthy. And furthermore, when you have proxy consent, it has to be based on what you would expect the patient would want if they could express their consent. And what we know is that intact men almost never choose to be circumcised. So we know the expectation is not that they want to be cut. The expectation is that they don't want to be cut.
I wish I were cut, you know.
Exactly. And so the consent is invalid. They can't claim that they've had valid consent because there was no urgent need. It's not consistent with the expected will of the patient. And so it just shouldn't, they can't say that they've gained consent for this surgery. It's done without proper consent. And so that's another legal problem with infant circumcision as it's practiced in America today.
This interview was great, and it was kind of long, so it's going to be broken up into a couple parts, but once it's done, all the episodes have aired, feel free to check it out on YouTube. My YouTube username is Rev and the Rest. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.